All right, why don't we get started? Good, almost evening, afternoon, everyone. I'm Fritz Mayer. I'm the director of POLIS, the Center for Political Leadership, Innovation, and Service. He's co-sponsoring tonight's event with the DeWitt Wallace Center for Media and Democracy. This is part of our launch of what we're calling the Purple Project, Bridging Red and Blue America. Last night, some of you were at the event we had on PolitiFact's new Trump-o-meter, which is monitoring, as they did with President Obama, the promises made during the campaign and whether or not the president fulfills those promises. Some ambiguity about which direction you want that to go, depending on your political leanings, I suppose. Tomorrow we have inauguration watch, where we'll watch the inauguration and the speech, and we have a panel of a couple of faculty members, Peter Fever, Deandra Rose, two students who were commenting on the inauguration and the discussion. And then at 3 o'clock, we have a discussion of North Carolina politics with a really distinguished group of North Carolina leaders, Senator Dan Balz, first African-American Speaker of the House in North Carolina, a Democrat, obviously, Senator Tamara Behringer, a Republican from Wake County, John Hood, who's the president of our Pope's Foundation, and Rick Glazer, who's the executive director of the North Carolina Justice Center. So that should be a really good discussion of North Carolina politics. But tonight we're talking about mostly the national scene, and we're obviously talking about polarization. We have a wonderful opportunity this evening using this documentary that aired the last 2 evenings on PBS. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's 4 hours. I commend the whole to you. We'll be watching pieces of it along the way. It's a look at, it's called The Divided States of America, and it's really a look back at how we got here. And the premise of this evening, I think, is that it's really important if we're going to get out of where we are, assuming that most of us are, whatever your partisan views, somewhat dissatisfied with the tenor of politics and the degree of polarization, which is extraordinary at this moment, that it's useful to look back to understand how we got here if we want to get out of here. And so we have a fabulous panel this evening to help us with that. Dan Balz in the middle is chief correspondent at the Washington Post. Most of you know, I'm sure, his work is really one of the deans of political writing in the United States, author of best-selling books about the last 2 elections. I don't know if you're writing another. Not yet. Has won multiple awards, the regular on Washington Week and other public affairs shows, and really one of the most thoughtful observers of the American political scene. So thank you very much, Dan, for coming. Next to him, and I'm blocking your view, many of you here saw a slide over like this, Jason Zengerle, who is the chief correspondent for GQ magazine. Before that was senior editor at New Republic, and before that at Politico. Jason's actually based in Chapel Hill. In fact, I just read, he's really best known for his long-form journalism, lengthy pieces on the rise of Ted Cruz, for example, but I just enjoyed reading a short-form piece on you taking your son to the Trump rally, which was a lovely short piece. And finally, and certainly not least, Phil Bennett, who is the Eugene Patterson Chair of Public Policy and Journalism here at the Sanford School, former executive producer of Frontline, former managing editor of the Washington Post, reporter for many years for the Boston Globe and the Washington Post, and also executive producer, co-producer of the documentary The Divided States of America. So we couldn't ask for a better panel to talk about not just this documentary, but where we are and how we got here. So thank you all very much for coming. I'll step out of the way and turn it over, I think, to Phil. So welcome all of you.
Well, thank you, Fritz. I'm really pleased to be here with Jason, whose work I've admired for a long time, and with Dan, who's been a friend for a long time and colleague at the Washington Post, and who in the television documentary world is known simply as the Jedi. And if you've watched these 4 hours of film, you see how much both of them have contributed to this sort of epic story that we tried to tell about the Obama years and how they fit into where we are today. So what we're going to try to do over the next hour or so, before we open it up to questions for you, and maybe a little bit less depending on how quickly we go, is to do a little bit what we tried to do in this documentary, which is to identify and talk about some of the key moments or markers over the last 8 years that really led us to the moment we are now. Now we're reading those years backwards from the reality of the election of Donald Trump and the moment of uncertainty that we and sort of unprecedented politics that we face today. But we're going to try to tease out some of those moments and analyze them. So we're going to show 3 clips from the documentary that Dan and Jason are in. The first is really sort of a setup thing. This one is, I think, about 8 minutes long. The other 2 will be a little bit shorter than that. And just to get started, this is from the beginning of the documentary. And for those of you for whom, who grew up in the age of Obama and for whom 2008 and the whole 2008 race is you were in grade school or still, coming of age, I wanted just to show at the beginning something that captures how candidate Obama presented himself in that 2008 race. We're going to see that, and then a little bit on Sarah Palin, who was the nominee for the vice presidency for the Republican Party in that period. And from there, we'll just launch into our discussion, and then later, as I said, open it up for questions. So let's see that.
On the campaign trail in Iowa, he delivered his message.
We can finally bring the change we need to Washington.
Hope.
We are ready to take this country in a fundamentally new direction.
And change.
The American people are looking for change in America. We are in a defining moment in our history.
The state was a crucial test of whether white voters would support Obama.
Iowa turned out to be the real litmus test. Did he have the capacity to draw votes from other demographic groups?
If white people would vote for a black candidate in a mainly white state, said, this guy really has a chance. This is not playing anymore. This is not Jesse.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention?
By the day of the caucuses, it was unclear whether Obama had convinced enough Iowa Democrats.
We start to initially get sort of turnout reports, very anecdotal. The lines are out the door.
Nobody foresaw 239,000 people participating in the Iowa caucuses. I mean, so when 239,000 people came out, it's like, they just blew the doors off every assumption about the campaign.
At this defining moment in history, you have done what the cynics said we couldn't do.
Obama won a critical victory in a state that was over 90% white.
All of a sudden, people woke up and said, my God, maybe it can happen. That's what happened. It was like a jolt of electricity going through the entirety of the black community.
You came together as Democrats, Republicans, and independents to stand up and say that we are one nation, we are one people, and our time for change has come.
It was a message that put Obama on the road to the White House.
Thank you, Iowa.
This is where John McCain will appear with his running mate, but we still don't know who it is.
But first, his opponent, Republican Senator John McCain, would have a surprise for the country.
Are swirling that Senator John McCain is about to choose his running mate for vice president.
Who will John McCain pick as his running
McCain
mate?
had become a fixture of the Republican establishment over his 25 years in Washington. He was struggling in the polls as voters seemed to want change. He needed a newcomer to neutralize Obama's change candidacy.
He needed to find someone. An African-American running, you got to find a woman. But you have to find a woman who meets some of the litmus tests in your own party.
Very privileged to introduce to you the next Vice President of the United States, Governor Sarah Palin of the great state of Alaska.
At the time, few realized that the decision was a turning point for the Republican Party and the history of American politics.
Palin was a signal moment in the tensions that were developing and would ultimately explode within the Republican Party.
McCain's advisors thought she was very different than what she turned out to be. They didn't realize that she would be this populist crusader and turn into a sort of right-wing grassroots populist.
Ladies and gentlemen.
As she arrived at the Republican convention, Palin's down-home straight talk was appealing to an emerging group of rebellious conservatives.
Well, I'm not a member of the permanent political establishment.
She gave one of the best convention speeches I have ever seen. And she mesmerized those people.
I'm not going to Washington to seek their good opinion. I'm going to Washington to serve the people of this great country.
She electrified the crowds with her own brand of prairie populism, attacks on the Washington establishment, and those she labeled the elites.
I've learned quickly these last few days that if you're not a member in good standing of the Washington elite, then some in the media consider a candidate unqualified for that reason alone. But
she didn't talk like politicians. She wasn't careful with her words, that she didn't make a lot of sense sometimes.
I love those hockey moms. You know, they say the difference between a hockey mom and a pit bull? Lipstick.
I don't think there's ever been someone that close to the presidency, I mean, who, at least for as long as I can remember, who was that seemingly, let's say, did not have the classic qualifications for the office.
Thank you, and God bless America.
John McCain ushered an insurgent, somebody coming in from the outside, literally from Alaska, and then also in every other way in terms of her background and her regard for elite institutions.
But this governor of Alaska, she's something else.
Sarah Palin has completely transformed the Republican Party and the next presidency.
Boy, were you right about this one. Did you know?
For her base, she was heroic. But in New York, she was made into a joke.
I present Governor Sarah Palin.
First off, I just want to say how excited I am to be in front of both the liberal elite media as well as the liberal regular media. I am looking forward to a portion of your questions, so let's get started. Yes, you.
You said that you'd like to visit the, quote, pro-America parts of the country. Are there parts of the country that you consider un-American?
Yes, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Delaware, California.
When she was asked in an interview with Katie Couric what she reads every day.
What newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this?
She was embarrassed and sort of squirmed a bit on camera.
All of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years. I have a vast variety of sources where we get our news to.
She didn't just not have an answer. She was contemptuous of the question.
Suggested it seems like, wow, how could you keep in touch with what the rest of Washington, D.C. may be thinking and doing when you live up there in Alaska? Believe me, Alaska is like a microcosm of America.
To some people, they thought, well, okay, that signals the end of her candidacy in some sense. But for another segment of Americans, this was validating. This was vindicating. There was somebody now who had a similar suspicion and sense of alienation from these East Coast effete intellectuals.
And that was really the first time that you had this establishment versus grassroots conflict. And you had it because, for some people, Sarah Palin was Margaret Thatcher. For others, Sarah Palin, I don't even know who the analogy would be, but just someone who was not qualified to be where she was.
I was reading today a copy of the New York Times.
Palin became the voice of a growing number of Republicans who were fed up with politics as usual in their party.
And she was, in fact, an early indicator that things were changing in the Republican Party, that it was not the same party of the George H.W. Bush and Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Ronald Reagan era.
Drill, baby, drill!
She was not even really conservative. She was just a bomb thrower, and I think that it took a long time for people at the top of the party to recognize what the anger that Palin was channeling. It wasn't just the Democrats, but the Republican elites as well.
Palin was the beginning of a challenge to the establishment that would only grow in time.
So I want to show that clip just to start our conversation because
There they are.
In the dark. Yeah, yes, that's right. So I wanted to sort of, put you in the Wayback Machine back to 2008 to really start this conversation by asking, how much do you think now the seeds of what happened after the Obama administration were planted in that, very early in the term of President Obama?
It's interesting the way this was framed, which crystallized for me probably in a way that I hadn't thought about it quite as much until you guys did this documentary, of the significance of that going forward. I mean, we knew Palin was a very unusual choice, but at the time, we interpreted it as mostly a Hail Mary on the part of John McCain, that they needed to shake up the race. She was an outsider when she was elected governor in Alaska. She had knocked off an incumbent governor in the primary, Frank Murkowski. So she had all of the requisite qualifications of what we began to see after that. But at the time, you thought of her as an odd choice, a sort of desperation choice, and because she seemed to melt down through part of the campaign, ultimately a not very good choice. But we learned soon after that she had a constituency that was sizable and remarkable, and it was a challenge to the entire establishment, Republican or Democrat, whatever.
So President Barack Obama is elected president. He arrives in Washington carrying the message that we heard from Iowa. What does he encounter when he first arrives and tries to then make this vision into a reality?
He encounters a Republican Party that has absolutely no interest in working with him, and it's not Sarah Palin's part of the Republican Party that feels this way. It's the establishment Republicans who have made the calculation that Obama's coming to Washington on the promise that he's going to heal the political divide, he's going to be a bipartisan figure, and he starts proposing things that Republicans in the past probably would have supported, and I think Obama thought he was going to have good faith partners to fulfill these promises he made. But the Republicans realized that as the party in the White House, any sort of bipartisan achievements that Obama was able to accomplish, all the benefits would go to Democrats, they'd all go to Obama, so there was no upside for Republicans to participate in that. And I think that at the same time, though, that they were obstructing Obama, they were very, oblivious to this threat within their own ranks that Palin represented. I mean, I do think what Dan was saying about at the time, the view of Palin was just that it was a Hail Mary, and it backfired. I mean, there were polls that showed it really cost McCain a lot of support. So I think that a lot of Republicans thought that she and what she even represented was kind of a passing fad, and it wouldn't have any staying power, and they could kind of keep on doing things the way they wanted to do it, and just obstruct Obama. That was their main goal, was just getting in his way. They weren't really paying much attention to what was going on inside their own party.
I think one of the other things about Palin, again, in retrospect, is that she seemed to understand in that period that she did represent something, that she had independent appeal, that she was not an appendage to John McCain's candidacy. I remember, you probably remember this too, the McCain campaign decided to pull out of Michigan very early in the fall of 2008. And Palin was outraged by this, and Palin wanted to go into Michigan on her own to campaign. I mean, we could fight for this state. We should fight for it. There's a way to do it. She was overruled, but it was a sign that she had her own view of what the message ought to be, and a sense of a constituency out there that was ready to listen.
There was that famous thing on election night when McCain was going to give a concession speech, and Palin wanted to give her own concession speech. And the McCain people had to say, no, you're not allowed to talk. I mean, there was already this, she definitely viewed herself as an independent figure who had her own ideas. And I think, yeah, those tensions that played out in the campaign, she talked about going rogue and all that. I mean, those tensions existed well past election day.
Was the president and the new administration naive about this reality that Jason just described? So they arrive in Washington, and even I'm working on this, so one of the things that surprised me about reliving this period is how quickly it goes badly. So the president's first order of business is to introduce an economic stimulus package. Remember, he comes to power in the midst of a terrible economic situation. And within a week, he finds that he's going to get no Republican support for that measure, and in fact, it passed without a single Republican vote. So is the Obama administration miscalculating or naive about the assumptions of what it can accomplish from the start?
Yes, they were, but I mean, you have to remember, I mean, if one of the things that's in the program that you weren't able to show, Inauguration Day 8 years ago was this unbelievable scene. There were 1,800,000 people stretched across the National Mall. And there was a belief that this was in some ways a turning point, that there was a feeling of goodwill toward him, even among a lot of people who didn't vote for him, that breaking the racial barrier in the presidency was a historic feat, and that combination of the goodwill toward him and the depth of the problems that he inherited with the economy would in one way or another bring the country together. And what we all, overlooked was the hostility to Obama that existed even during that phase of the general election when Palin had been chosen. Again, there are scenes of McCain having to take the mic away from somebody who's saying he's not a real American or I don't trust him. All of that was there, and it was in the polling data that there was a hostility toward him among at least a part of the conservative population. And as Jason said, when the establishment Republicans decided that they would oppose him on all his legislative stuff, you had that overlay, and so there was no way he was going to be able to get those things done in a bipartisan way.
They still clung to the idea that perhaps they could do that, and they tried to fashion packages that would, with healthcare, for example, packages that could interest both Republicans and Democrats, but they failed.
Well, they failed in part because the Republicans were not willing to do that. I mean, they worked hard on the health care bill to bring along at least a few Republicans. I mean, it was
they just wanted one or two. That was all they needed.
Yeah. I mean, describe that.
I mean, I think Obama really thought he was going to have good faith partners, and and there were certainly individual Republicans. I mean, Chuck Grassley on the health care bill, the Republican senator from Iowa. I mean, they went to great lengths to win him over, and they crafted it with very specifically with things that he would like. And Grassley, I think he couldn't do it. He was feeling the pressure not only from Senate leadership, but he was feeling an enormous amount of pressure from voters in Iowa, and I think that taps into what Dan was saying about the hostility towards Obama. That if you do think back 8 years ago, it really did seem like this this transformative moment. I mean, Obama had a mandate. You know, his popularity was sky high. You had all these people on the mall. It seemed like Republicans would be crazy to oppose him. And I think that was something the Republicans themselves, you know, they were really worried they were going to be in the wilderness for a generation. But the leadership decided they were going to, and then at the same time, they were bolstered by this grassroots hostility towards Obama that, you know, you did not see in Washington 8 years ago. People who hated Obama were not protesting on the mall, but their hatred of him was really visceral, and anything that he touched, even if these were not really all that liberal proposals. I mean, these were in some ways, you know, sort of liberal Republican proposals, kind of like 1970s era neo-Rockefeller Republican stuff. Even those things, just because Obama was the author of it, they consider terrible. And, you know, there's just so much personal hostility.
So as you alluded to before, there's this, you know, there's polarization between the Republicans and Democrats, and then there's polarization within the Republican Party. And that also, from very early in the term, becomes a factor in the first. You talked about Senator Grassley going home and facing primary challenges and Republican anger for cooperating with the administration. In the first years, how does that sort of internal dynamic inside the Republican Party play out? In the polarization there.
Well, I think the establishment Republicans and elite Republicans thought it was a wave they could ride. You know, I think that, you know, a guy like Eric Cantor, who we'll see later, I think he really viewed this as I think he was early in detecting this hostility out there, this populist anger, and I think he thought, okay, I can harness this and I can use it to, you know, get a Republican majority in the House, and then all these new members will appreciate the help I gave them, they'll be loyal to me, and that'll be my power base. And I think there were other established Republicans, people in Washington they weren't upset by this. I mean, they saw the energy, and they recognized that this was gonna, you know, give them majorities in Congress eventually, which were quite important. And I think they saw it as a good thing. I mean, I think they thought they could tame it. I mean, you know, because traditionally, establishment Republicans have been able to kind of harness the grassroots and come to some sort of accommodation and use that as the energy to sort of fuel their own ambitions. And I think they viewed it as kind of the same dynamic that has played out in the past.
And it looks like by 2010 they've done that, right? At the midterm elections.
Yeah, I mean, the 2010 midterm election was in essence a kind of a ratification of that strategy. And harness the anger at the grassroots, create a wave, take over the Congress, and then have the ability to really go after Obama and try to defeat him in 2012. And so at that point, it all seemed to be working in a way that was helpful to the Republican establishment.
Can you look back at just that first period, you know, the image on the mall, the president takes office with, you know, 70-something% approval rating. Just 2 years later, he suffers this, you know, shellacking, as he says, and really a devastating midterm defeat. What's the dynamic that produces that?
Well, you know, President Obama is, you know, he's a very self-confident person. And he looked at that defeat and he wanted to believe that it wasn't really about him. That it was still a weak economy, that he hadn't been able to do enough on the economy, that they were putting things in place that were solid. He clearly felt bad for the people who got beat, and he recognized that he had contributed to that. But what happened right after the shellacking was they had a lame duck session. And he came in the morning after the election or thereabouts and said to the staff, we've got an opportunity in the lame duck to get some important things done. The New START treaty with the Russians, they did Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He had a successful run in that lame duck session. And they made some deals with Republicans to get some things done. And I think he believed as a result of that he was going to be able to work with the Republican leadership in the House in a constructive way. I mean, Obama did believe that he could bring the country together, and that he could make the system work, that he could kind of guide the discussion to a place where people would make the compromises. And so I think he started 2011 believing that there was still a possibility that he could fulfill that goal of, you know, of uniting the country.
You know, and I think John Boehner thought that too. I mean, I think there were Republicans who agreed with Obama, and the new Speaker of the House was a guy who had a history as a deal maker. He had worked with Ted Kennedy on No Child Left Behind, and I think he got to become Speaker, and he viewed this as an opportunity for him to leave his mark and make history. And I think he assumed that these 87 new Tea Party freshman House members would all submit to Washington grooming lessons, and they would go along with it. And he was in for a really rude awakening. But it wasn't just Obama who made this calculation. I think Republicans did too. I don't think they realized just how different these new congressmen were, and how they were not going to go along with the old sort of agreements and game plans.
So I want to just have both of you talk about this episode called The Grand Bargain. And for those of you who don't remember or have never heard of it, The Grand Bargain belongs to this very alluring literary genre called the budget story. And yet it had sort of Shakespearean dimensions. And both of you said it was sort of a defining moment, and Obama is coming to terms with the abilities of bipartisanships, and you've also talked about the Grand Bargain, the collapse of the Grand Bargain, being a really seminal moment in this. So maybe one of you could start by just describing in as appealing terms as you can what was at stake here, and why that negotiation was so intriguing.
This was a battle over A, budgetary matters, and B, raising the debt ceiling. And Republicans decided that they were going to use the need to raise the debt ceiling as a moment of leverage with the president to try to extract from him some significant changes in spending in particular. And they started out with negotiations led by Vice President Biden and Sanford. Those didn't get anywhere. So the president decided to reach out to John Boehner directly. They invited him to play golf, which was the first sign of it. Then they entered into secret negotiations. And not once, but twice, they were seemingly that close to an agreement. And the first time it collapsed was when word began to circulate that there was, that the president and Boehner were close to something. And the Wall Street Journal, we believe egged on by Eric Cantor, or Ryan, basically said, don't do this. Republicans don't make this deal. And so on a Saturday night, Boehner called the president and said, I can't do it. And everything went haywire. They then entered into a second round, and a more serious round, and they were very, very close at that point to getting a deal. And then what happened was Boehner had agreed to $800 million in new revenue, not necessarily tax increases, quote unquote, but tax reform that would reduce new revenue, which was a big step for Boehner. And the president supposedly had agreed to some cuts in entitlements. A bipartisan group in the Senate came up with a plan that called for way more in new revenues. And the president went back to Boehner and said, I've got to have more revenue in this deal. And Boehner said, no. So the ultimate end of this was the president calls Boehner. Boehner doesn't return his call for what, Jason? A day? 24 hours or something? It's extraordinary. The president of the United States calls the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker ignores him for 24 hours. And basically says, we had a deal, I'm not changing the deal. And at that point, it collapsed into this total mess. They worked out a very messy compromise, but one that everybody knew basically kicked the can down the road. And by the end of that, public confidence, consumer confidence had plummeted. The debt rating or the bond rating had been lowered by Standard & Poor's or Moody's, I can't remember which. And there were recriminations all the way around. The president had thought if it ended up that way, the Republicans would get the blame. And in fact, he got the blame as much as the Republicans. And at that point, he decided, okay, I'm going to have to fight this out in the 2012 campaign. There's no more negotiating with this guy.
Is that the importance of this for him, that in sort of the story of polarization and partisanship? How does this?
Yeah, I think he realized that there was going to be, at least at that moment, there was there was no point in even talking to Republicans anymore, that I think nothing was going to get done. I think everyone in Washington realized that absolutely nothing was going to get done until the 2012 election. That was going to be a referendum on everything that's been happening. And then after 2012, if Obama wins, they're going to do what Obama wants to do. If Republicans win, they're going to do what Boehner wanted to do. And that was going to be the decision. But basically, you had to go to another election to get it all taken care of. It just kind of froze things in place.
But it was an incredibly low moment for the president. Talking to people not long after that, I mean, they said he was really, really down, really, really upset. Now, he obviously had other down moments subsequently, so where this ranks in the hierarchy of bad moments, I can't really say. But it was a really tough situation for him.
And it was, it also, I think, did sort of dawn on Republicans how things were changing for themselves. I mean, Cantor's role in that was confusing. I think Boehner was suspicious that Cantor was trying to use this to overthrow Boehner. Cantor was saying, I'm trying to save you from yourself. Basically, if you do this, you're going to get deposed as Speaker. It was really hard to know what was actually happening there. But basically, Boehner wanted to make the deal. And I think if left to his own devices, Boehner would have made the deal. And I think he couldn't do it because he couldn't bring his caucus along. And it was in large part of those 87 new members.
So this incipient struggle inside the party was playing out.
It was kind of dawning on them that there were some tensions there.
There's another aspect of this, which was the question of, was Obama actually tough enough to do what his people believed he needed to do? I remember having a conversation with David Axelrod. It was around Labor Day of 2011, and he was basically saying, what Obama had to do, which was really to take the fight to the country and to the Republicans. And for somebody who had come into office as the guy who was going to bring the country together, this was a big test. And I said to Axelrod, I said, do you think the president has it in him to do it? And he said, we're going to find out. I mean, he didn't immediately say yes, absolutely. I mean, I think even he had a question about whether, because he said he's got to make that pivot. He can't kind of have it both ways anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point. It sort of follows what you said, Jason, about if the Republican strategy was to deny, they had the power to deny Obama the victory of creating a bipartisan system. I mean, they controlled that equation, and that could be a strategy for them. I want to shift and talk a little bit about the subject of race, which pervades this whole period. And without going back into the 2008 election, most of you would remember that candidate Obama faced a crisis in his campaign over comments made by a pastor in Chicago. It was his pastor who resulted in giving a very important speech on race during his candidacy that many people thought saved that candidacy and allowed him to go on and win the presidency. The way we deal with this in the film was it created an expectation that regular speeches, advocacy, using the bully pulpit by the president would advance the country on race. And instead, in the first year, with one exception, President Obama tried to stay away from talking about race, and actively and disappointing some people who expected them to do that. But then a series of incidents occurred that drew him again and again into addressing questions of race. And one of the things we try to do in the film is to measure both his response and then the response to his response as it bears on this question of polarization. So this is a shorter clip about Trayvon Martin, the Trayvon Martin case and the president's response to it. I apologize, I don't know why the quality of the streaming video is a little herky-jerky, but we'll hope for the best on this.
Sanford Police Department, line is being recorded. This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic? He looks black.
The caller was George Zimmerman. He had spotted a 17-year-old African-American high school student near his home.
These assholes, they always get away. Are you following him? Yeah. Okay, we don't need you to do that.
That student, Trayvon Martin.
Do you need police, fire, medical?
There's someone screaming outside.
All right, what is your...
There's gunshots.
You just heard gunshots?
Yes.
How many?
This one.
He was shot and killed by Zimmerman.
Trayvon Martin was walking back from a convenience store when he was allegedly shot by a neighborhood watch captain.
Police have the gun, they've got the shooter.
To some, the shooting suggested that race may have played a role.
Trayvon Martin's only sin was his skin color, and that had he been a white kid in a hoodie trying to walk home that night, no one would have confronted him or bothered him. And I think that is why Trayvon Martin becomes such a pivotal tension point on race and justice during the Obama years.
Mountain of evidence in the Trayvon Martin shooting case.
Story that's ignited fierce passions across the nation as allegations of racism and miscarriage of justice tear
The man who
apart.
shot Trayvon hasn't been charged. He's claiming self-defense.
At first, the president did not make any public remarks about the shooting.